We could even kick it off with some karaoke. Could do that. Do some Earth, Wind, and Fire. Maybe some Simon and Garfunkel.
I don't know a lot about Simon and Garfunkel.
You do?
No.
Oh. I think it's like it's like the guy, and he has a big cat, and it loves spaghetti.
Get out of town.
Yeah.
Is that Simon or is that Garfunkel? Or is
I think it's Garfunkel.
It's exciting. I never seen that intro before.
Really?
Yeah.
I like it. I made it myself.
Did you?
I did.
Get out of town.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Brick by Brick. I am your host, Brad Critchfield, and with me today, my good friend, Shannon Stewart. Shannon.
What's up? What's up?
Dude, thanks for coming in
Hey,
today.
man, thank you for having me.
I appreciate you.
It's good to be in the new studio.
Yeah. AKA my garage. I need a good workspace. So when the COVID thing happened and I had to work from home, I needed to make a space. I tried my daughter's room for a while, but it didn't work out. So here we are.
I think this is everybody's space post-COVID.
Yes.
You know.
And we did a podcast not too long ago. How long ago was that? 2 years? 3 years? 3 years maybe?
Yeah. No, a year?
Was it? No.
2 years maybe. 2 years.
Maybe 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot's been going on the past 2 years, man.
Jesus.
Yeah.
It is 2020 is like the twilight zone of years.
It is a very crazy year, man.
Everything you thought could happen did happen.
Yeah.
And yet we're still here.
Yep.
Shows you the resilience of man.
Yes.
That's what I believe.
And so why don't you tell people, who you are for those that don't know, and Helping Hands Giving Hope. That's your nonprofit that I'm pretty sure your wife does all the work.
My wife doesn't do any of the work.
Really?
No, I am the face, the hands,
okay,
the size 14 feet,
okay,
everything behind Helping Hands Giving Hope.
Would you believe if I told you I have size 14 feet?
No.
Yeah,
On these big shoulders. Now, all jokes aside, so Helping Hands Giving Hope, we are a 4-quad nonprofit. We do 4 things, only 4 things. We do homeless care, we do mentorship, we do financial literacy, and then I do a lot of civic awareness stuff, letting people know in the cities, hey, need exists. How do you resolve that need?
So are you still doing the care packages and all that? Or?
It's funny, Brad, because when COVID happened, that I think when did we go under March 18th or something like that? We were trying to figure out, because we had our Blessing Bag event coming up a week following. Like, what are we going to do? And so as we go through this, at the core, Helping Hands Giving Hope it's just like the name says. You help wherever you can. And so you figure out, where can you still help? Right. That just because COVID happened, that doesn't mean need doesn't exist. So, through our partnerships, we still had people that we partnered with that they were still going downtown LA. They were still going downtown to Skid Row. They were still doing the things that they were doing to meet the needs of others. And so we were able to partner with them. And it's funny, Brad, because Helping Hands Giving Hope went to doing care packages to the end of March. We were doing PPE for nurses in New Jersey that couldn't get masks.
Really?
Yeah. And then we were doing gowns for people at Lakewood Regional because they were respiratory therapists that they couldn't get gowns. And so through our partnerships and the help of our partners and supporters and all of that, we're still able to keep the train charging.
Yeah. Nice. So how long have you had the nonprofit for?
Helping Hands Giving Hope came about in 2015. Okay. The idea came about in 2015. We kicked it off in 2016.
Okay. And why did you start that?
Honestly, it was interesting. So this is a lesson for people that fail to see the light in the midst of dark times. So I'll give you the 30-second or 2-minute version. So I worked for a startup. My background's in the finance space. We'd gone through our Series A, Series B finance runs. And then I got laid off. They came to me one day and they were like, "Hey, it's not you, it's us."
Oh, it's like a breakup.
Yeah, but when I say it's like a breakup, because you got to get attorneys involved. They got to give you an agreement. Then you got to sign an NDA. I won't sue you. You won't sue me. You come to a financial agreement. It's literally a breakup.
Yeah.
And so about a month after getting laid off, I found out my mom had stage 4 type 3 breast cancer. And so we figured she'd beat it. And during that period, so this was March 2016 or 2015, for a 2-year period of time, I couldn't find work. Like none of the businesses that I own were
What year
working.
was this?
2015.
Okay.
So for 2 full years, I didn't have work. Couldn't, like literally, I applied at Trader Joe's for executive jobs. Nothing.
Yeah.
Nowhere. And so during that 2-year period of time, it allowed me to spend time with her. And then my wife came to me one day and was like, why don't you just build something? So what does that look like? Then from that, we started Helping Hands Giving Hope. We started making bags in the garage. We partnered with the Taekwondo studio. We made 200 bags. And then my wife, myself, 2 other people, we went downtown Long Beach and just handed them out.
Nice, man.
And so from there, it went from doing that to doing just that 200 bags period to doing 150 bags a month to 150 bags a month, and then food. And then from doing that to doing a Thanksgiving giveaway, then a Christmas giveaway, then a backpack giveaway.
And that's so. What percentage of time do you think you commit to that, to Helping Hands Giving Hope? Like what percentage of your time?
So the idea of Helping Hands Giving Hope, I mean, that's our life. I have I run a financial literacy for-profit business. I work for a credit union in my 9 to 5. But my priority outside of my family and, meeting the obligations legally that I have to the credit union that I work for is Helping Hands Giving Hope.
Yeah.
So, that's, once you run something like that, it's all consuming.
Yeah.
Because you don't own it. The need owns it. So as long as the need persists, no matter what it is, if you get a call and they're like, hey, can you come and, pray for a guy that's in the hospital, you go. If my wife gets a call and says, hey, we need you to come over to Teen Challenge and pray with these at-risk or spend time with these at-risk youth, she runs a Mary Kay business. She'll go do that.
And how much of your time is focused on like mentorship? You mentioned that, like mentoring, just young men in the community.
It started off as being young men in the community, and then it's now young men, and then my wife, through her Mary Kay business, and now it's young women.
Okay.
And then it went from being young women and young men to families.
Okay.
Because that's a large piece of the financial literacy component.
Right.
When I start looking at the financial literacy component, 65% of marriages that end in divorce end because of financial stress.
Right.
And so, when you start looking at that type of thing.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, it's funny because I think money's the great equalizer, okay. and here's what I mean when I say that, or it's a great amplifier, rather. No matter what you are, if you have a whole bunch of money, you just become more of that.
Okay.
And so when we start looking at that, men that have issues with infidelity, you give those men a ton of money, men or women, then they just have greater issues with infidelity.
Right.
And so, I think when you start looking at the need of money, because it's the catalyst for a lot of things. When to answer your question, why does it happen? Well, if a person is stressed about money, from a husband and wife perspective, and they have kids, now they're stressed about how do we feed our kids? How do we clothe our kids? That stress then begins to amplify and spread into other areas of your life.
What do you think is the 3 things somebody can do to avoid that pitfall of letting finances get in the way of your relationships?
I think the biggest thing is being a good communicator about it.
Right.
And then number 2 is have a clear understanding of where you're at. Right. I think the difference between, a budget, I call it the B word because, people look at budget as me telling them what not to do, but it's simply you telling your money where to go versus your money telling you where to go.
Right.
And then to understand that money's a replenishable asset. Mm-hmm. I was sitting with this guy once. I'll never forget this guy, Brian Kelly, if he ever watches. And we're sitting in Texas one day, and he says to me, we're having a glass of wine, and he says, money is replenishable. And I was like, what do you mean? He says, well, you've had times in your life where you've had no money. He said, I've had times in my life where I've had no money. He said, but I've also had times in my life where I've cashed checks for $400,000. He was like, you can always make more money. No matter what happens, you'll never be busted where you can't make any more money.
Right.
So it's not a big deal. Like, money's not a big deal to me because I've seen people that have a ton of money, and I've had a ton of money, and I've seen the people that have no money. I went through a 2-year period of time where I had no money.
Right. And there's that difference. Like, there's a difference between being poor and being broke, right?
Well,
Or,
I
like,
mean,
being poor is.
I think being poor is a mindset.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
being poor is an attitude.
Yeah.
I think it's understanding. I have this discussion with my 11-year-old all the time, Shannon Jr. I say, look, in life, purpose to be an asset, not a liability.
Mm-hmm.
And so in everything you do, you have to purpose to be an asset. I think what we've got accustomed to, and this whole thing with COVID, and then the unfortunate murder of George Floyd, and all these things that has happened, it really has put us in a position as a nation where we figured out where we place value.
Okay. Where do we place value?
Well, I think we place a great deal of value on self. And what can I do for me versus what I can do for we.
Elaborate a little bit.
So, a perfect example. When you look at other countries that they reported different numbers, and I say that kind of tongue in cheek because one of my best friends is a physician. We look at the COVID numbers. It's always the pushback that we've gotten here in the U.S. is we can't do this. I can't go get a haircut. I can't go do this. I can't do that. Versus understanding the greater good of things. What's the impact? What impact does my action have on everyone else and those around us?
Yeah.
And I think, as I focus on philanthropy, that's been kind of my drive. That's our drive with Helping Hands Giving Hope. I tell people all the time when they say, I was talking to a gentleman recently, the CEO of USC, the University of their credit union. And he was asking me, well, what can we do? What can we do? They have a big push to tackle homelessness. And I said, well, you can do something. And it's that simple. If you can do anything, do something.
Right.
Have some type of push.
Do you think local communities do enough to tackle homeless issues?
No. And I say that, boldly because, it's interesting, Brad, because as you start really diving into this, when you look at certain cities, particularly cities around us, the one thing they say is we don't have a homelessness issue. Well, guess what? No one has a homelessness issue until homeless people pop up somewhere.
Right.
Then
who says we don't have a homeless issue?
Well, you hear a lot of cities say that I've met with cities in the past where they've been like, nope, we don't have a homeless issue.
I feel like all the cities around here kind of like
there's homeless people everywhere.
Yeah.
And so it's not something you can turn a blind eye to. I think.
You think that's something that needs to happen at the county level, or do you think that's up to cities to take that on?
Well, I think from a fiduciary responsibility standpoint, I think the onus of that begins with the city. Mm-hmm. But the city receives funds from the county.
I mean, yeah, look at like a city budget compared to a county budget.
Right.
It's like hard to.
And the county gets a boatload of money because they're funded by the feds.
Right.
And then,
But see, like when you look at like the federal, I'm a big fan of local governments. Like the more local you can solve an issue, the more efficient the solution's going to be. When you try to make these big solutions on the federal level, a lot of it doesn't apply to a lot of different areas. But we have a space issue in LA. We have a space issue, generally speaking, in California. We don't have a space issue in the United States. I was having this conversation recently where it's where were you born?
I was born in Compton.
Born in Compton. Where were your parents born?
My dad was born in Hot Springs, Arkansas. My mom was born in LA.
Okay. So Arkansas, and where was your grandfather born?
He was born in St. Louis.
Okay. So like the generationally, like from St. Louis to Arkansas and then you were born in Compton, and then your kids were born in.
Yeah, we lived in the greater LA area.
There, like the actual migration of people, for generations. Like, so my father moved from the Azores, Portugal, when he was 4, to the United States, and then I was to California. Then I was born California as well. But like we've kind of reached the end of the continent, right? So
Yeah.
it's like we're all kind of like pushed up against the cliff here, and we have a huge space issue, and it's as easy as predicting that the grass is going to be wet after it rains. It's like if you have more and more people being born, people are not moving, and there's no more places for, and we don't have a lot of vacant lots in the area for more housing. We're going to have a housing problem.
Well, I mean, you think about it like this. So you think in Los Angeles, there was in 1910 there was 1 million people in Los Angeles. Now you look at today.
What are we at now?
I don't know. There's
I'll
40.
check this out.
There's 40
And
million people,
people
in the state of California.
People love it when I do this because they'll be watching live and then hey, you gotta switch to me, dude. Dude, I hired this intern to switch the cameras. He's sleeping on the job. I think he's playing Tetris on his Game Boy or something. Jeez. I forgot. Oh, people love it when I do this because I'll ask Alexa something, but they're listening to this live, and then it'll like trigger off their Alexa. So I'll say, Alexa, how many people live in LA?
As of 2017, the population of Los Angeles, California is 4 million people.
4 million in LA.
4 million. That's
Yeah.
just in Los Angeles only.
Yeah.
And so you start thinking about it in that vantage point. Now, here's where I stand with this, because homelessness it's a touchy subject, because people
Why?
think about it. When they think about it as a resource issue, right? On a national level, we don't have a resource issue. So there's not a money issue. Like there's enough money within the United States to tackle the issue of homelessness. I think it grows bigger than that. It's a desire issue. It's a desire of.
So yeah, not all homeless is like a lot of it's a choice.
And some of it's a choice,
Right.
but how do you deal with? I had this discussion with a guy the other day. How do you deal with underemployment? I think you said it once before that in college you slept on people's couch.
Yeah.
You were homeless. You just
Yeah.
didn't sleep in your car or on the street.
Right.
So when you start looking at it from that vantage point, you really start looking. I mean, we just saw the feds pass a $2 trillion deal for stimulus.
6, right?
Well, 2 initially, and then another 4.
Right.
And so you look at that. That doesn't say you're a
That,
resource.
that math really bothers me because like the stimulus, they said it was a stimulus, and I'm gonna try not to rant on this because me and my pool boy here were talking about that the other day, and well, it was for a $1,200 check, right? So they're calling it a stimulus, but when you take $6 trillion and divide it by the amount of people that live in the United States, it's $10,000 per person.
Right.
So we signed off on $10,000 worth of debt as a nation so we could receive $1,200 that we're going to have to pay back at the end of the year. Because it wasn't even a stimulus, because you can't have stimulus without commerce, right?
Right.
Because there's nothing, it's not like they were stimulating the economy because everything was closed down.
There is no economy.
Right.
to
It was
stimulate.
it was a survival check. It
Right.
was so you can. It really was a credit card bailout check, so you can still pay your bills but even then, like correct me if I'm wrong, but that gets deducted from your return at the end of the year.
So the claim on that is that it's non-taxable. That's the claim.
Sure.
But again,
But it still counts towards your, like, if you were going to get $5,000 at the end of the
it's
year.
still gross income.
Yeah.
So you nothing's free.
Right. But we still signed off on $10,000 per person worth of debt, because $6 trillion divided by 324 million is about $10,000 per person, right?
Well, I mean, I think even the bigger thing is that you take it from the mindset that, what are we borrowing against, right? So when you look at the idea of a national debt, you're borrowing perpetually from a Social Security fund in the future.
Right, exactly.
So on page 3,
borrowing from your grandkids.
yeah, on page 3 of your Social Security statement, it does say clearly, your fund will exhaust. I think when I looked at my last Social Security statement, it says by 2033, the fund could be at 0.
Yeah.
So when you start looking at those things, we still have homeless issues. So when you start looking at the state of California, look, it would, as one that deals with a lot of homeless, you'll always have homeless in California because the weather's great. If you're going to be homeless in a place,
Right.
it's best you be homeless here. So that doesn't work for you to be homeless in Arizona right now because it was 109 there today.
Right.
Or you can't be homeless in Michigan in the winter because it's, or in Montana or North Dakota where it's minus 20.
But it's also, I mean, isn't there when you live in a state that does have so much resources for the homeless population compared to other states, wouldn't you go to a place that you could probably get more help from the state?
Well, I think that's part of it also. When you look at the state of California, the state of California is the 5th largest economy in the world.
Mm-hmm.
The UK is number 6. Germany, and I think Germany may be like number 7 or 8. The state of California only. The state's the 5th largest economy in the world. When you start looking at it from that vantage point, it floors you because with the state being the 5th largest economy in the world, you would think the state would have the resources and means to resolve a lot of these issues. And,
Right.
It was interesting because when this COVID-19 deal hit, now they've employed hotels to house homeless people. So you've transitioned homeless people off the streets. So we could do that now, but we couldn't do it before.
But do you really see that as a long-term solution? Because if you break it down, I mean, you got like somebody who invests in making a hotel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're expecting to make some type of profit and make a living off of it. But now the state, I don't know how that works as far as this. Is the state paying the hotel
From what I understand, the state, it wasn't like the state,
But they mandated it.
Yeah, but
right?
it wasn't like they did eminent domain and took the hotel over. Like they're still, covering the cost of a lot of that.
Yeah, but now it's so taxes going to the state to pay for people to live for free, right?
Or is that still a debt issue? The state of California was when we record a $54 billion deficit.
Yeah.
At the start of 2019, the state was at a $21 billion surplus.
But no matter whether it's surplus or not, it's still money that's going to be owed at some point, and it's going to the government doesn't create money; it takes money and redistributes it, right?
Right.
So I mean,
Well,
again,
we can argue that it doesn't create money because.
No, it does create money, but no, it doesn't create. It doesn't create value. It creates dollars. Right. But like there's. If it is a resource thing, then yeah, they could do a lot, especially at the state level. But is that really a long-term solution? And then what does that do as far as people's motivation in the workforce and motivation to excel and work and be productive in a society if you know that you can just get it for free?
Well, I mean, I think that's the fight against socialism, right?
Exactly.
Those that are proponents of socialism. Pitch it one way, but those that are adversarial towards the idea of socialism pitch it in that fashion because it's not sustainable.
Right.
And you look at countries that
never really worked.
Venezuela didn't work. Greece, it didn't work.
Like, don't get me wrong. Like we it's not absolute. Like we live in a hybrid economy, right?
Right.
It's not completely free market, and it's not completely socialist, but we take from a lot of different ideas and we make something that works, and then we push one way or the other, and we do the best we can, I think. But there's always that element of, and this is coming from somebody who grew up in Section 8 housing, you want to have a safety net to take care of those who either can't take care of themselves or just need the safety net. But you also don't want to take away their will and take away the ambition to innovate, to create, to produce, right?
Right.
So where's that line when it comes to even with homeless? Because I have family that's homeless, and they, for all intents, like they choose that lifestyle, and it's difficult. But if you were to offer them keys to a hotel and say, hey, you get to live here for free, that's not going to motivate them to do anything differently. Like they're just going to live there. Well,
I think when you start evaluating homelessness, and homelessness, I think it's a problem it's a part of a problem of a greater problem.
Where it's like broken down into different.
Yeah, because I think
Is
as we
mental health
evaluate,
problem.
it's a mental health problem. It's a foster care problem.
Mm-hmm.
25% of homeless population are foster care age outs. It's a veteran problem. What do we do to care for our veterans? Like you said, it's a mental health problem. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with substance abuse? How do we deal with handling of post-traumatic stress disorder? Not so much from a military sense, but, we don't know what people have faced. And as I spend time talking to people, you start to see that things are different.
What do you think the breakdown is? Because I've always, when it comes to the homeless problem, and I do have a lot of compassion for the issue as a whole, but it's kind of a weird one to lump all together.
It can't be lumped together.
Right. So like, it's not like homelessness, there's so many different subsets of that. So like the mental health aspect of it, and like people that need mental health support, like that's a whole different, they happen to be homeless, but they really just need medical help.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have people that are, have drug addiction problems and they need a different type of help. You have veterans that have a hard time adapting to society, and then that's a whole different type of support. Then you have people that just literally don't want to conform and have to pay, most of whatever they earn to rent, and they've given up on that this norm that we call society.
I believe you do have to have some type of rules and values. So when I look at cities that are plagued with homeless, you look at places like San Francisco,
Mm-hmm.
Really interesting dynamic to be homeless in a place that has the third highest property values in the country. How is it that there's a huge homeless problem there? Well, what controls has their local government put in place to manage that? Well, they have it. They've kind of just been like, well, if you crap on the street, so what? If you pee on the street, so what? So I think that's a drastic swing with things. I think what we're seeing in the world as we see it today is we're seeing people having to pick a side. Either you're, far left or you're far right. There is no in between. And when you pay attention to that, I think that's extremely dangerous. The idea of picking a side in this type of environment is extremely dangerous, because then you have people forcing you to prescribe to a side.
Yeah.
And Brad, if you don't think like this is what we're going to say about you.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's tough. So I think as we start talking about homelessness and reforming that system that cares for the homeless, I think that's where a lot of this has come, where a lot of the pushback from both sides has come. No one's come together.
But is there, like, I mean, most issues I totally agree on, like the polarization and getting pushed to the radical or the fringe. The homeless, I feel like there's solutions that could happen at different levels that don't need to be so radical. Just like they're pretty common sense. I mean, really.
Well,
Maybe first of all, we need to identify those that need different types of supports, instead of like lumping up and say we have a homeless problem. Like, okay, well, which one do we have? Let's go out and let's put together a task force that's going to go out and identify the different supports that each community needs. And then you have to make contact. You have to create follow-up and some type of accountability, and you create resources.
And the follow-up and accountability, that's where the problems start. When you evaluate Los Angeles, so if you look downtown Los Angeles as it sits today,
yeah,
the homeless population has kind of been pushed out because there's been a revitalization of a lot of areas downtown.
Yeah.
So where those homeless people go? Like, they were there on 7th and Grand before. Now there's hotels there. There's, bustling restaurants and nightclubs. Where did the homeless people go that were there? Where are they at now?
Right.
And so,
I don't know.
And being that they're somewhere now, it means that the city had a means in which to move them out somewhere.
Right. Well, isn't the new rule, like at the local level, you have to be able to offer some type of resource or housing if you're going to ask somebody to move along their way? So so Bellflower, from what I know, has done a lot when it comes to the homeless issue.
We partner a lot with Kingdom Causes and other agencies in Bellflower.
Yeah, I know Juan Garza, the mayor of Bellflower, has done a lot.
Yeah,
and I've noticed the difference. I mean, I live in Bellflower. I'm right off of Artesia. I've noticed a lot of improvement. But I think you have to be able to offer some type of resources or affordable housing to them before you can say, hey, you can't camp here, you can't do. Because I also was talking to somebody and they were saying that a lot of the reason why police won't move like an encampment is because legally they have to move all of their stuff as well.
Right.
And sometimes that's, I mean, you would have to, literally physically go out and do all that. And, that's.
It's interesting because if you drive off the 710, there's a number of encampments off the 710.
Yeah.
And, there's one day you might see it cleaned out. I saw Caltrans cleaning it out about a month ago.
Yeah.
But now it's back full force again.
Right.
And so, I think Bellflower's done it's something different because Bellflower's recognized the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then not only recognized the problem, they've said, okay, who can we partner with to help us manage this problem?
Right.
Not completely eradicate it, because 9 times out of 10, when people say we want to eradicate the issue of homelessness, they say that because they don't want to see homeless people on their streets.
Right. And that's a totally different thing. I mean, when people say they want to fix the homeless problem, like they just don't want to see it. They want them to go away rather than actually create some type of support. And a safety net is very, very necessary. And I say that even from even people that are conservative should really believe in a strong safety net, because a strong safety net is what creates the ability and the will to take risks in an economy, knowing that if that business idea or all the thing, whatever you invested in doesn't work out, you're not going to end up on the street and have nothing. You need to have a safety net, and that encourages economic productivity,
right?
Because people can take risks and know that they're not going to lose everything, and they can lean on the community to bounce back and then try again. That's the whole thing. So you need to have the safety net, but I don't know. What do you think is like a good solution, not a Band-Aid, but a good solution for communities to address the homeless problem?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to do is to, Bellflower does something where, and I picked this up from Kingdom Causes, where they always refer to people as homeless neighbors.
Yeah, I have a good friend who doesn't call them homeless. She calls them friends without homes.
Yeah,
and I can appreciate the thought and the sentiment behind that. It just sometimes it's more work.
Here's what I think, Brad. As I think it's pertinent that you have to realize that these people are people.
Sure. Like I said, I have a brother who's homeless, and he does not want to not be homeless.
And it's interesting because the first time I encountered that, I was at a homeless encampment right up by Angel Stadium before the Orange County Sheriffs cleared that out. And I was, for me, when me and people that I go with, when we go to these places, it's spending time walking around, talking to people, figuring out who does what. And, I was talking to a lady, and I'll never forget this. She said, oh, yeah, my husband and I, we live out here, and our son, he's moving out here next week. And so it was her and her husband, her son and his wife, and then her other son, his wife, and their daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really interesting to me because I was like, well, he has a home now. Why don't you guys just live with him?
Right.
No, they wanted to transition, and they were all going to live in a tent together, off the 57 in that encampment.
Yeah.
Now, is that the lion's share of the homeless population? Probably not.
Right.
But, when I talk to people that have been on the streets for 15 or 20 years, or like a gentleman I talked to last year that had been on the streets for 35 years, you look at that kind of stuff and you're like, wow, this is, is this a way of life? How can he change this?
But it's also it's very difficult for people to get out of that, right? Because it's to think of like not paying rent and not having a job,
right?
And then you look at like how much you'd have to pay to have a roof over your head, say even in this area. So say, I don't know, the smallest, most affordable apartment you could probably find, what, $1,200, most affordable, like with a deal. $1,200 is a lot of money when you don't have a job or you don't have anything. Right. So like for people to get out of it, and then, it's not as easy to just go out and get a job. I mean, well, if you don't have a place to take a shower, if you don't have money for a haircut, if you don't have,
if you don't have an address,
right. If you don't have an address, if you don't have access to a computer, if you don't have, I mean, there's just a lot of things. So that's why I love the idea of offering the supports to encourage and motivate people to get on the right track, but also acknowledging the fact that just because it's the right track doesn't mean that they always are ready to accept that type of help. And sometimes, that rebellion against, I was always the straight edge brother of
Right.
I do everything proper and right. And I have brothers that don't, that I'm pretty square, but
It's a lead the horse to water, but you can't make him drink mindset.
yeah, it's very frustrating. It's an issue that I've had to put a lot of thinking time into. I mean, I remember getting a call at 2 a.m. because my brother needed he was hungry at 2 a.m. and was sleeping at the park, and I had to go pick him up and took him to Walmart and got him a sandwich, and then he shoplifted on the way out. It's like, you son of a, but it's frustrating, but at the end of the day, I mean, no matter sometimes the more you do, the more you realize you're not helping. And I think that that's the difference, like identifying what is support and what is enabling. And that's like, that has to be a part of the conversation, right?
Well, I mean, I think it's, a big thing is to determine there's a thin line between empowerment and enablement, right?
Right.
So, as you start looking at how, are you empowering people or are you just enabling them?
Right.
I think what we're seeing now, we see a lot of enablement going on,
Right.
Particularly when, we live in the state of California where, mysteriously money just pops out of, out of nowhere. And they're like, oh, you live in the city of Los Angeles, we'll give you $1,000 Angelino card, or,
Right.
The state will do this, and, landlord relief. And, we got a governor that I work for, I do work for a credit union. So, we have a governor that says, hey, this is my executive order, that this is how you're going to treat people that owe you money. And, and then you have, assemblymen that say, okay, well, let's create another bill to push this out even further, not understanding the downstream impact of a lot of these decisions.
Yeah.
And so, I think when you start looking at that and you start looking at the idea of people wanting to avoid the norm,
Right.
it makes you think, what happens next?
Right.
It's, when you look at what's going on in Seattle now, where, you have a group that they've, completely taken over, a downtown area, and they're like, this is our place.
Choptown.
Yep. And you're like, someone died there last week.
Yeah, I think, man, how many people got shot over that weekend?
Yeah, and they didn't allow people to, aid to come in and give them help.
See, that stuff, like, that gets me mad.
So you
Gets me mad.
you look at that guy, that's a drastic swing,
Yeah.
right? And so, I think on both sides of the fence, the danger is that we look at stuff very, whatever side it's presented to you on. And I think that's the deal with homelessness, is that it's been presented to us in such a way, by media outlets and things like that, that people think homelessness is this. But no, there's 1,000 moving parts and 1,000 moving components to homelessness.
Yeah. And I'm not gonna pretend like I know more than what I do, but I have like my own personal experiences with it, with knowing quite a few, friends without homes. And I also know how I feel about it from a point of just philosophy on like what's going to be productive in the long run, as opposed to, like you said, like identifying what is enabling and what is empowerment. But it's definitely something that needs. It's hard to just say we need to build more affordable housing, right? It's hard to just say that,
Because what's affordable?
right? What's affordable, and what I really like is Marisa Perez. She's the president of the Cerritos Board of Trustees for the college. They just opened that new affordable housing for students, and it's beautiful. And so the college purchased the land, and then it's amazing, and like they're filling it up, and I'm not 100% sure on how it works, but at first I was like, Like, so they just like live there for free. And like, it's coming from a guy who slept on the floor and the couch, you know,
Right.
I'm like, no, you gotta, it'll build character. It hurts your neck, but it builds character. But no, like, so like, it's not permanent. Like they live there and then, but while they live there, there's things that they got to do. And then
You have an equity share.
and then they will get support to it's more of a, what's that called? Where it's like a transition type
Yeah.
of thing.
It's true transition housing.
Yeah, see, that's cool. I like that. It's just like when it's more of like a permanent thing. Like, okay, now you don't gotta even worry about it. Like you gotta have that drive, and you gotta have something to work for, right?
Well, I mean, and I think that's, what we've learned through this whole COVID-19 ordeal that we're still going through is that you either got people that are going to come out of the back end of this better than they went in, and those that don't, it's a shame.
What about you? Are you coming out of this better?
I don't know. I think part of me would hope so. I think it's a tough transition because you don't want to focus on, again, I work for a credit union, so my 9 to 5 is I still have to go to work during this period of time, and you're still concerned about your wife and your kids and how they're doing and how they're faring with that. I got an older father, and
I got lucky, man. I was able to work from home, and I'm so glad because it would have been really hard for me to not be. So I feel you.
Yeah, to leave every day, and then when when this George Floyd situation happened, and you have the unrest from that, it really painted a different picture. It put us it put a lot of things that we had been dealing with on the forefront. And as I talked to my son who's 11 about this, about the changing state of the world, it's uncomfortable for some.
Yeah.
I talked to my dad who lived through the civil rights era, and like I said, he's from Arkansas, so the things that he saw in life was completely different. So he's seen a lot of these things and a lot of these unrest and a lot of these transitions in thought. And
How old are your kids?
yeah, 11 and 7.
Man, those are important years, right? Because they're old enough to really see what's going on. Dude, my pool boy just does not want to turn the camera on me when I'm talking. Jeez, it's just you when I'm talking. It's gonna look like what's that when the
It's like a monologue, just me.
Yeah. No, those are important years because you're old enough to really see what's going on and old enough to actually look more into it, and it's not just what you hear, but you can actually dig into it. How are they doing with all of this?
It's interesting because the COVID piece was one thing because they're both dealing with that. My daughter knows that.
Are they gamers? Do they play video games?
Yeah, but
Okay.
but my son's they don't get to sit on video games all day.
Yeah.
But when the COVID thing first happened, and I think March 13th was their last day at school.
Yeah.
My son's in basketball, my daughter's in soccer. There's things that they had going on, and then all of that stopped.
Yeah.
And then we fast forward 2 months, and then you got complete unrest on the streets. And my son is worried about, well, wait a minute, you got to go somewhere. How does this impact you? How does this impact our family? How does this impact you going to work every day? Are you going to be safe? Do you feel safe? So now it's a different conversation that I have to have with him as a preteen, than I have to have with her.
So your kids are mixed, right? Do you think what do those conversations look like with your kids?
Well, it's a different conversation because my son is 11.
Right.
So, I always say to him in our house, I'm not raising you for the boy you are at 10. I'm raising you for the man you'll be at 20.
Right.
So you're a black man no matter what.
Yeah.
You're not seen as anything other than that. So let's talk about some things about how life is different for you versus some of your other friends that you hang out with.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that's, I
How
think,
is it different?
Well, I mean, I think you're viewed different. His experience are different. The experiences that he will have is different. The conversations we have to have are different. And so when we start looking at it from that vantage point, it's, I believe as a father, it's my sole duty, and you're a dad, to equip you with information that you need to be successful when you leave the house.
Right.
So I have to empower you that once you leave this house, you can conduct yourself in a manner in which you've been equipped to do.
Right.
So I don't, mince a lot of words with them. You
Right.
know, when the whole George Floyd situation happened, it was literally us sitting down, me and him, one Saturday morning, and I'm talking to him about this is what happened. And he cried and he said, that guy didn't get to go home to see his family. And, then later that night, he came back downstairs and says, I'm scared. I'm scared because how will this impact you?
Yeah.
You have to leave the house. And it's funny because as you start looking at those things, it's been a long time since I'm 43. It's been a long time since I was 11.
Yeah.
I think kids at 11 now have access to information that at 11 I didn't have.
Right.
I didn't have access to an internet or a 24-hour news cycle or the ability to see things.
Yeah.
And these kids see things, and you're like, how do you even know
Crazy,
this?
man. I wonder what that does to the psychology of kids with the 24-hour news cycle. Because it messes with adults pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't really thought too much about that. Like with young ones getting exposed to that kind of with us or against us polarization of 24-hour news cycles. I don't envy the challenges that kids have a hard enough time finding their identity and becoming confident and secure, let alone with all this other stuff on top of them.
And I think it's funny because one thing that I thought was interesting is that he would ask about unrest. Is it still unrest going on? Or is there still rioting in those areas? And we were tell him, you don't have to worry about that because that doesn't impact you here.
Right.
My goal is to keep you safe here.
Right.
There's nothing for you to have, you don't have to even think about the fact of other things going on outside of here. I think it's a child's psyche, particularly at that age, I think is very, very fragile.
Right.
And, I have to be cautious on what I tell him, but more importantly, how I tell it to him.
Right.
Particularly as it relates to issues of race and inequalities in those areas.
Do your kids have pretty mixed, like a group of friends?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how do their friends respond to this stuff?
But I think again, for my son, it's a little bit different because his friends are a bit older, and so he is seeing things as a black teen would see things. And part of that, it could be because I tell him, this is how you probably should see things, or just be aware of these things that occur.
Right.
So, I think as you start looking at it from that vantage point, it's funny because a lot of parents, I think, have shied away from talking about race and race matters with their kids. And
Right.
I think that's a great disservice.
Yeah, but, and I'm not in that position yet because my girls are younger. Duke says, what's up? Duke says, what's up? It's, I think it is hard for parents to really have that conversation because when sometimes I think for older people, sometimes like even if it's your thoughts are rational and fair and coming from a good place, it may not be the generally accepted thought pattern, and you don't want your kid to echo something that you think and then it not be accepted. So I don't know. I don't have that problem yet, but I would imagine that with older kids and parents talking to them, they just may not have like the narrative down for those kids. I feel like you have to almost be exactly on what the narrative is, or else the kids will get in trouble.
Yeah, and I think you gotta one thing I've seen is you have to avoid a narrative and just give them the facts of things, and be very matter of fact of this is the situation, this is what happened. My daughter, again, she's 7.
Yeah.
I think I've learned the hard way because she refers to people as jackasses at time, and
Yeah.
my wife is like, you always say that. I don't always say that, but I have been known to call a person a jackass from time to time.
You call me that every day.
And so when you start looking at it from that vantage point, of course we've had to change and dumb down a lot of the things for her. With him, I think it's I have to be very intentional in the information that I provide to him.
Yeah. What are a couple things that you would say young men, regardless of race, like need to know right now? Like what's one message you would say for them?
I always tell my son this. He asked me a question recently. He said, "What's the greatest advice you ever got?" And I said, "To listen twice as much as I talk." I think that's the one thing. Number two thing is to be the leader of the pack, and to do what you feel is right. Inherently, do what you feel is right.
Yeah.
Because I think oftentimes, when we start talking, when you look at the idea of street gangs, the effectiveness of a street gang is they provide you a great sense of belonging.
Right.
And on top of providing you a great sense of belonging, they provide you a great sense of comfort.
Yeah.
Oftentimes you don't get that anywhere else. And human nature is to seek out that. Human beings, we want to feel like we belong. We want to feel the need of acceptance. And so I think that's part of the issue what we're seeing today. That's why I think people are so shaken by the voices that they're hearing today, because it's contrary to what they've heard in the past.
You don't think it's a culmination of decades of the destruction of the family unit?
Well, it's. I think that's a big piece of it. I think when we look at, let's start it from it looking like this, because I can't speak about anything besides an African American family unit. It's interesting when you look at ownership. African American land ownership is less than it was in 1950. Today, African Americans as a whole own less land today than we did in 1950.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
Well, why is it that African Americans had the lowest divorce rate, right? Not too long ago, and now it's one of the highest, right?
Well,
not divorce, but single parent households.
So I think a lot of this is, and you said something earlier that made a lot of sense when you start talking about the narrative. Mm-hmm. I'm always pushing back on the narrative that we hear.
I always push back. And honestly, my life would be so much easier if I just shut up and stop, pushing it, because I feel like you get in trouble just for asking questions or having an opinion.
And I want to, I'm always trying to talk through the narrative, because when we start talking about, the CDC in 2016 did a fatherhood study, and it showed the presentness of African American fathers that are in the home, mm-hmm. and the activity rate of African American fathers that are in the home. Well, that narrative is completely different than what you hear in the mainstream media. But, how many people go and research these things?
Wait, say it again.
The narrative is like, we hear this, that, the family unit is absent of black fathers. In some cases, that is the case. But in a lot of cases, that is not the case. So if you and I'll send you the CDC study on that. When you start looking at the idea, because we want to feel that, black neighborhoods are minus of black fathers, and look, I think it's
not an absolute, but are you saying that that's not the case? You're saying that it's the same as other races?
It's not the same, but it's not as huge a disparity as we were taught and as we're told. So as you start paying attention to a lot of these things that we hear, it paints the picture of what we think, black family should be, or what we think, fatherhood should be.
Well, I don't think it's just, my philosophy on it isn't isolated to black families. I said the destruction of the family unit. I think it's an economic thing. I think that economically, we've created a system where uh, there's a disincentive to have a cohesive family unit, especially if you make under a certain amount of money,
Yeah.
and that dependency on the state. It's the state becomes daddy, and then there's actually incentive to keep daddy out of the household. And what happens is, the state becomes daddy, and then we have a lot more authoritarianism and militarization of the police. That now that's the daddy,
You have to have
giving spankings when you shouldn't need that. You should, again, I always go back to like the more local the influence and control, that the more effective it's going to be. The family unit is the most important, and I don't care if it's two dads or two. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the family unit, as far as having both accountability and unconditional love, and whoever's given that, I don't whatever, but having that sense of belonging that you said that a lot of people get from gangs, and the comfort that people can get from gangs or different groups or different belonging to the family is what really matters. And my experience growing up in Section 8 was that there was a huge incentive to not have a family unit. The state actually created a system where you couldn't have a family unit and still get the resources and support from the state. So it was very difficult. And that decades and decades of that, I think, are starting to we're starting to see the effects of that.
Well, and as you talk about the family unit, now I can only speak of a family unit from husband and wife, because I'm a husband, I got a wife, and then I grew up in a husband and wife household.
Yeah, me too.
I think there is a great importance on having some sense of authority,
Mm-hmm.
and some sense of roles.
Yep.
So I think inherently how God has built a man and a woman, we have different gifts, we have different talents, we have different abilities, we have different abilities to, I observe this with my wife, is, she's a great nurturer. Now, no one taught her to be a nurturer. It's just she's hardwired in her DNA to be a great nurturer. I'm a great provider, and one that does great with security,
Mm-hmm.
and laying down the law, except on my daughter. I don't lay down the law on my daughter.
Right.
I try.
I'm a pushover with my girls,
Yeah,
man.
but with my son, he gets the law laid down on him frequently. And when you look at that, and you just said something that made a lot of sense, when you remove any piece of that out of the equation,
And
it's shaken.
And I'm not saying just if you just take the dad out, if even dads who have to play both roles and do that's still gonna give the same problem. You need, like, life is about balance, and a child's developing mind needs balance. It needs to feel that unconditional love and support, also a sense of accountability and discipline, and and I was lucky enough to get both, but my mom passed away when I was 16. I have 5 brothers, and some of my brothers didn't get the yin and the yang. They just got the yang, which is very authoritarian. And my dad's amazing, but he was amazing because he was balanced by my mom, who was just this angel and just unconditional love.
Right.
Just I could do no wrong. It was just pure love. And it worked, but I got 16 years of that, and her life was cut short, and she passed when she was 39. But my little brothers, they didn't get that balance. So whichever, and you don't have to, be like that nuclear, that family. And sometimes it might be the mom who's the authoritarian. Maybe that's her strong point. Maybe she's very busy. And then maybe she, is with a husband who's just the unconditional love and just can do no. But there's some sense of balance, and I think psychologically, you need that. So I really think a lot of the problems, it all starts in the home.
Well, and I think you're right. And then if you add to that, everything we see today tells us from a media onslaught perspective that that family unit's not needed.
Right, right. Even everything from media, from the news, from to like cartoons, man.
Right.
Like the dad is always painted out to be some bozo who doesn't know up from down, who's getting pushed around, and we've created this thing of like toxic masculinity, and we've really shot down the idea of what it means to be a man or to be masculine, and we've made it into this evil thing, and I don't know what that's all about. I know I have some thoughts on it, but at the end of the day, it's all about like people's actions and how you treat other people. You could be masculine and be a great person and do no wrong, and you just have strong work ethic. There's just a lot to that.
It's I oftentimes ask people this, Brad. I always ask them, what is toxic masculinity? Because from the perspective of I can't be something, I can't be overly something that God gave me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm a man. My body produces a heightened level of testosterone. It's going to cause me to be masculine. So what's toxic about that? Is it the overt actions and things like that,
so
we assign to that as being toxic?
Right. So I think it's more of the attributes that are assigned to that, like the chest pounding, the physical, being violent or
Right.
physical, catcalling, being everything's over sexualizing your surroundings, things like that. But they've deemed that as toxic masculinity, and sure, okay, fine. Like I think you could be a jerk, or what'd you say, jackass? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think anything I do that can hurt someone can be toxic.
Right, and you could be offensive and all that, but that doesn't mean that like just because you're masculine or you're a strong male figure that you're bad or toxic. I think they overuse the term toxic masculinity. It was too broad of a brush.
I think we have to be. I'm always cautious of vilifying things.
Mm-hmm.
To fit my narrative. I mean, even myself, I have to evaluate the stories I tell myself, and have I vilified certain situations,
Mm-hmm.
and certain instances and certain people to fit my own narrative,
Yeah.
to fortify the story that I've continued to tell myself.
Give me an example.
Well, let me think. So I'll give you a perfect example. It's the and it's this is a perfect time for something like this. So the all cops are bad narrative.
Right.
I haven't told anybody this.
Man,
So
you're going deep.
So
dude.
I haven't told anybody this. So this is the first time anyone will hear it. So last week I was driving home. It was on a Sunday. So my wife and I and the kids, we'd gone somewhere to pick up something, and we were driving home. And I happened to turn down the street. Well, my tags on my truck are expired. Now I've paid the DMV for my tags back in May.
Mm-hmm.
They just haven't sent them.
Right.
And so as I turned the corner, a sheriff pulled alongside of me and one pulled behind me. And it was a great fear that swept over me in the midst of all of this stuff that's going on. Like, I got my family in the car. Am I going to get stopped? What's going to happen? Could this happen? And, the guy followed me for about 2 minutes. And, they I think I was slowing down. So they went around me and
Right.
got on the freeway. And I thought, is that a story that I've told myself that had me in that type of fear, in that type of state? Have I vilified that situation to the point where it had me thinking like that? And so, as I got home, it really caused me to sit down and think and say, all right, why did I feel that way?
Yeah.
What caused me to feel like that? How should I have felt? And so, as we look at those things, I have now, and when you ask, how have I changed throughout this quarantine period? That's one of the things that I've really focused on doing, is really taking time to just sit down and think through situations to figure out the why I feel certain ways.
Yeah.
And then from that why, I can then develop how I'll feel in the future,
Yeah.
how I'll change things, how I'll act, how I'll treat that person, how I'll act.
Yeah. I mean, I freak out even if like if I'm getting pulled over, because I think there's also something. And I'm not discounting the other aspect of that, but like just having my family in the car, dude. I'm like always like ultra, aware and very like nervous about like I'm protecting them. And like even if like I get out of the car and like I go into a store, like I'm constantly looking at my car and making sure that they're okay. Like I forget about that.
But again, so that goes back to you being a head of a family unit,
Yeah.
right? And what you've been hardwired to do.
Right.
Now, part of that is your combat trained, and so you've taken a responsible aspect to figure out. All right, well, if things happen, how do I defend my family?
Mm-hmm.
How do I handle these things? How do I resolve these situations? That's that's part of that family unit of your wife as the nurturer, you as the provider and caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're gun owners in my house. Like that's like I'm kind of like a gun nut. So like that's my thing. Is like
Are you really?
Yeah.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Have you always been?
Yeah.
Why? Because so you said you lived in like the greater LA area your whole life, right?
No, I lived in Arizona for a few years.
Okay, is that when you got? Is that when you got into it?
Probably from the time I was. Maybe I lived in Arizona for like 12 years and then moved back. So I did all of high school and college in Arizona and then moved back.
Okay, so when did you buy your first gun?
9/11.
Really?
Yeah.
Shops were open that day?
A pawn shop. I bought a Smith & Wesson MP9
Wow.
from a pawn shop for $220.
So you went out and bought that day?
Yeah, because I
Wow.
thought the terrorists were coming and something was going to happen to me.
Man.
But so you look at that now. This whole COVID thing happens. There's a run on guns and run on ammo, and California, you can't get a firearm anyway.
Yeah.
And you have people now that have gone out and said, I picked up a firearm a couple of weeks ago, and when I picked it up, there was a guy in there buying his first gun. So
Yeah.
the guy says, "What do you want?" He was like, "Well, like one of those guns with attorney things in it." The guy was like, "Or a revolver," and I was like, "Wow, that's really scary," because this guy has now made a life-changing decision that could impact his life and the lives of others, but he hasn't taken the time to familiarize himself and arm himself with information.
Well, what's great. I mean, if you're gonna own a gun, you're always gonna have to own your first one, right?
Mhm.
So that's normal. But when this happened, gun sales spiked so high,
Mm-hmm.
but shooting ranges were closed. People weren't doing safety training courses.
Right.
So it's like you're so gun sales spike, but no one's getting trained on them, and people are so heightened with just nerves and fear that man, like it's scary. That's why, and I have this thought of people have been locked in their homes for months and months,
Mhm.
and we already have a mental health issue in this country. Just over a year ago, the news was all about mass shootings and
Right.
and that's all we were hearing about, right? I'm not going out to any big events for a while,
Yeah.
just because I know psychologically the people that would commit terrible acts,
Or-
they already have
Right.
a hard time. Now you just lock them in their room for three months, gave them a bunch of different inputs in their head and more fear, more conspiracy driven stuff all over the news. Like they're freaking out. And so and then gun sales spike, and man, I try not to get too paranoid. But I'll be honest, if we thought we had a problem before this, we really got to be cautious and be very vigilant. This is not the time, and I don't want to go too hard in the paint, but I honestly think, and I'm going to separate two issues right now.
Mhm.
So I want you to run with me here. I'm going to separate whatever the stuff that's happening with police right now and all of the things that attach to that with this next statement. We need the police more than ever right now, because we have if we had a not a gun problem, but irresponsible gun ownership problem, a mental health problem, a civil disobedience problem, a racism problem, all that with this spike in gun sales and locked in your room for 3 months. We all have to be very vigilant and very careful, because the next year is going to be a very dangerous time.
Well, and I think when you start evaluating, California, California is an interesting place to live.
Yes.
Because it's not like you can go buy a gun, get it, and go home.
Yeah.
So in the state of California, there's a run on firearms, there's a run on ammo. You can't get ammo anywhere. It's interesting because, I thought about this as people go out and buy guns. They go out and buy guns thinking they're going to get the gun right away, and you're not. But also, to your point, they're not arming themselves. So as we talk about defunding the police, it's interesting because that whole discussion is something that it causes a raise of an eyebrow, because as you look at the city of Los Angeles hasn't balanced the budget in how long, but now you got the mayor saying we're going to defund the police.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that doesn't mean disband the police, but that just means shift those resources. But you're still talking about a place that hasn't balanced the budget anyway.
You're also talking about defunding something and at the same time talking about the need for more training and the need for
and so
more
when you start looking at that, I was listening to I think Rogan's podcast a couple of weeks ago. He had Jocko Willink on there, the Navy SEAL that wrote Extreme Ownership.
That was a great interview.
And so when he talked about the fact the training that goes in place now, San Francisco passed a law about not having armed officers respond to nonviolent calls.
Right.
Well, I mean, again, not to say it like this, I'm not wholeheartedly like disband the police if you want to, like we're armed, I can police my own home. But what about my neighbor 2 doors down that can't police his home?
Right.
Yeah, or the old lady neighbor that lives at the end of our cul-de-sac that can't police her home. What happens to her?
Right.
So as we start thinking about these, I think, as a
not every call starts out as a violent call either.
No.
I mean, it's like asking somebody to tell the future.
Yeah.
But I mean, don't get me wrong. Like again, like that's why I was kind of saying, like separating the two, just because, there is a huge problem with the militarization of the police, and
yes,
and me and my pool boy here were talking earlier, and I take a libertarian stance on a lot of things, and we have too many damn laws, right? So what we've done is we've made too many criminals.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've done is we've made so many people criminals that you need this overly aggressive police force that's a lot of times causing more problems than we really need, because a lot of things could be handled in court. A lot of things could be here's your ticket, go about your day. Not everything needs to be handcuffs and a night in jail. I don't think so. I think I lean very hard on freedom and the right to be free, unless you're harming somebody, stealing property, or a very small list of things in my mind warrant taking away someone's freedom and literally tying them up.
Well, I mean, I think now I spent a great deal of time doing like my church-based ministry career I began in doing prison ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent a lot of time in prisons, jails, and youth camps. And when you start evaluating California, where California says today, as it sits today, California is the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation.
Mm-hmm.
For the longest time, it was just the California Department of Corrections. There's no rehabilitation to that. Now, if you evaluate that now, what type, I always question the fact of if rehabilitation was truly occurring, recidivism wouldn't be as high as it was.
Right.
So, when you start evaluating that combined with the privatization of the prison system and those things, there's an incentive in a lot of instances to keep people locked away.
Right.
But, there's truly no rehabilitation present.
No. And there's an institutionalism that's happening. I know people very well that have gotten out of prison and said with a very straight face, can't wait to go back.
Yeah.
Just one person that I was talking to, they said they preferred it in prison because they feel like they can't do anything right when they're out. Like there's
Wow.
all this pressure on, like, doing the right thing, and just feeling this sense of shame and just like incompetence, and just they said they don't like that feeling, and they said and they said in prison I know I'm doing the only thing I can do. I don't feel like I'm messing up because I'm in line with everybody else that's doing the same thing I am. So there's like this sense of like there's no pressure.
And then how are we failing people?
Yeah.
I always think about that. I always think about from this vantage point. If that's how they feel, how are we failing them as a society?
Right.
Like, what are we doing to help them?
Well, I mean, just one thing off the top of my head is just this pressure that we put on kids of like right when they graduate high school. It's, so what are you going to do now?
Right.
What are you going to be? What's your decision? Make a choice. Yeah, it's been 3 months since graduation. Why haven't you made a choice? Your brother's doing this. Your cousin's doing this. Oh, he's off to college. Oh, he got a job down at the port. And you just feel this constant barrage of like, am I making the right choice? Am I making the choice fast enough? Am I going to get stuck doing this the rest of my life? There's all this pressure, and I think that when people get out of prison, they feel that same pressure all the way. So you've been out for how long? Oh, what are you doing? Well, what have you done? When are you going to do it? But in like this, it's this pressure of conformity and not wanting to let people down, but knowing that you are, and feeling of an incompetence, on top of that, and maybe just insecurity, and just not knowing what to do, and there's a lot of pressure that we put on, and again, I think that's one thing with schooling, that we put way too much pressure on kids. I remember that feeling. I remember feeling like I had to have an answer, right out of high school, and it was silly.
It's the funny thing is because now it's presented to you as one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
I think I talked about Helping Hands Giving Hope. The one thing that we do is we do a lot of financial literacy.
Yeah.
And so it's very hard for me to sit down with a young person and say, all right, I'm going to need you, Brad, I'm going to need you to go to college, amass $150,000 in debt to go get a $50,000 a year job.
Yep.
Well, no, this isn't life's not one size fits all.
Right.
What if you have an ingenious business idea?
Yeah.
And you say, hey, no, I don't want to do that.
Well,
I got this idea for this, and this is what it's going to cost, and this is, how I'm projecting this to work out.
But also, I mean, there's experiences that you can have in life as a young person that are going to expand your opportunity going forward. When I was going to community college, I had the opportunity to go tour with my band across Eastern Europe for 3 months, and I played a show. We played like 30 shows in like 60 days, and it was amazing. Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia. It's an amazing experience. But I got no support on doing that because I had to drop my classes in order to take that opportunity when the call came. And people, like, it was almost like I, was just like letting everybody down by doing this thing that I felt like this is a great opportunity. And they just saw it as like going on tour with your band. But a lot of like how I feel about politics and society and community comes from the time I spent traveling around Eastern Europe and seeing how it's done over there. Like, there's a lot of good that can come out of just not being lockstep with like going to college right after, but getting some life experience.
Let me ask you this, Brad. So this, and I think when you think about this, it puts it in this perspective. The idea of how money's distributed, because it always comes back to, I believe, and this is kind of partly my conspiracy theorist mindset.
Oh yeah.
It always comes back to some
I got tinfoil hats. We can bust those out.
It always comes back to some type of money.
Right.
And in the state of California, all that lottery money, where's that money go? It goes to the school district.
Right.
So you have people, that's why if you look at the city of Los Angeles, back to when, Villaraigosa was mayor, there was always a push to figure out how to get the city to control the school district because that's where the money is.
Right.
So you have people that may not be involved or vested in the success of these students that oversee the school districts. You got politicians that aren't invested in it.
Right.
So when you start looking at it from that vantage point and you start saying, all right, well, this starts with the family issue. Okay, outside of the home, it starts with an education issue. How do we make sure that those two areas are tight?
Well, you start by having communication between the family units and the school board, and making sure that parents are heard and that the needs of the students are met.
Yeah.
What I've noticed, and this is something I've really picked up on through this whole COVID thing, is if you don't have communication of like what's going on with your school district, and again, man, like it's unprecedented times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's very hard to grade people because we've all been kind of hit with a curveball.
Right.
So I don't think it's necessarily a jab at any, buddy particular, but you can see some pretty glaring issues, and that's one thing I've noticed with this is just no communication between parents of what's going on. And even if, the powers that be don't know what the solution is, then say that and say we're
Right.
working on it, or say, hey, here's the schedule coming up. We're meeting on this, and this. We're going to send out a poll to the parents, find out how, the laptops and the distance learning is working out for your kids. Give us some feedback. What do you think? What do you think will work? Communication is everything when it comes to cooperating between the family and the school district, and making sure that teachers are involved in that as well. Like communication, transparency.
I mean, because you think about it from this vantage point, the idea, like most of the kids go to school from like 8 to 5 or 8 to 3 a day, so that's 7 hours a day.
It's a long time.
And then by the time they get home, it's 4:30. Like for my kids are asleep by, wrapping it up by like 8.
Yeah.
So the bulk of their day, and then they go to sleep. The bulk of their active day they've spent at school.
Yeah.
And so we forget the formative ability of the school,
Right.
and the role that plays in a lot of things.
Where do your kids go to school?
They go to Las Flores Education Center. So it's a mixed-use education center in Bellflower where they do the early part of the day. They do, the first 2 days of the week, 2 days a week, it's homeschool. The other 3 days it's in the classroom.
Okay. Did you go to just traditional school growing up?
I went to private school for a number of years. And then when I moved to Arizona in the 9th grade, then I did public school.
Okay. Was that pretty big?
It was a huge jump.
Yeah.
I mean, it was wild.
Yeah.
Because I went to a large public school. There was a whole bunch of different things there. It was not a lot of kids that looked like me at the school. It was out of state. It was a public school. I was responsible for my own time.
Yeah.
But it showed me something. Going to school there, it showed me the importance of being willing to stick what I knew that worked best for me. And when you start looking at this, that's where the communication comes in at. I had a counselor. I'll never forget, Mr. Campos, and I'll say his name. So if this blows up and you're 100 million people watching, Mr. Campos, you told me not to go to college. You said I wasn't college material. Now I'll make more money than you do. And I remember sitting at his desk in high school, and he says, college isn't for you. And I said, and I had a plan. I went to him, Brad, with a plan. I'm going to go to junior college first. This is where I'm going to go. I've been accepted. We'll do 2 years there. Then I'll transition to. And he says, no, that's not for you.
I had the exact same experience.
No, it floored you, right?
Yeah.
And
what made me know, like, oh, damn it, now I gotta go to college.
Yeah.
Because I'm such a contrarian. I'm like, well.
And you got to think, I
now
graduated
have
high school.
to.
You graduated high school a bit after I did. I graduated in 1994.
Okay.
And so.
I was born.
Yeah. So you figure that. I remember that this many years later. I still remember that.
Yeah.
And, it shows you the impact.
Right.
Of the school.
Well, the importance of counselors.
The importance of counselors. The importance of a solid school district.
Importance of good counselors.
Yeah.
We put a lot of trust into sometimes strangers, right? To teach our kids and make decisions for our kids in that huge chunk of time. That's where being engaged as a parent is really important, right? Being able to have faith in the teachers, and also be able to communicate to the board administration when you see issues that you want to see improved upon.
Well, and it's interesting you say that, because that's the importance of that, of having, because we forget the business of education,
Right.
of the school. The school's just one piece of it, because the school gets direction from the district gets direction from the board that oversees the district. Going back to Helping Hands Giving Hope, one of the first years that we did our Thanksgiving meal giveaway, that we partnered with the IOWU on, we went and gave out meals and knocked on doors. And some of those doors was, a buddy of mine's on the board of a local school district, and he reached out to me and was like, hey, we've identified 4 or 5 families that they need help.
Yeah.
Wow, how in touch was he with that school district where he could say, this is where the kids go to school at. This
Right.
is what they need. Can you help them?
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you are you pretty engaged as a parent, like with the schooling?
My wife more, because she handles the day-to-day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
so
same.
she's like on the pack, and
Yeah.
she's involved with the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah. One thing that I'm really starting to get involved in, because my daughter Tori has IEP, and she has she has special needs.
Mhm.
Like advocating for her and making sure that she's taken care of. I never thought it would be it would be such a time consuming thing. That's why I'm very fortunate to have Mandy, who really stays on top of all of that. But moving forward, being able to advocate for her in the school is something that I'm really focusing on moving forward, and making sure that with the COVID thing, the good news and the bad news are the same.
Mhm.
Is that this is going to happen again.
Right.
So the good news is it's going to happen again, and we've learned a lot on what we need to do differently next time. The bad news is it's going to happen again. I mean, in some way, shape, or form, we have to be able to adapt now. So the next time something like this happens, we have something in place to where kids don't get left behind again, because kids
Right.
were left behind on this one. And I don't think it's anybody's fault necessarily. But I'm a problem solver. Like
Yeah.
I enjoy like the, having to scramble and create solutions. And, I work really hard on that. That's why I'm actually really glad that I gave up the gym when I did, because I was already thinking of 20 different things I was going to, do with the gym to make it like, even better throughout, COVID. And it was just becoming an energy and time suck. But, you need to have things in place now to where if this happens again, or when it happens again, kids don't get left behind. And the students that have special needs, we have to be able to address that as well, because they weren't addressed at all.
Well, and it's funny, because that takes us back to the whole communication piece.
Yeah.
Because when Governor Newsom said, hey, we're shutting down schools, you saw that press conference, and you saw the state superintendent's face after that.
Mm-hmm.
You could tell that there was limited communication between he and the state superintendent, because he was
Yep.
kind of like, what the hell are you doing?
Yep. And very limited communication between local school districts and parents as far as that's concerned, and it's just not good. And it's not fair to the teachers,
No.
because the teachers didn't know what was going on. And the teachers are fielding, concerns and questions from parents, and they are left out of the loop. And again, it's a very difficult situation to grade people on, because we all kind of, hindsight's 2020. We didn't know what, tomorrow looked like all the time. Very frustrating.
And what put that in perspective for me is that my daughter, who's 7, she was finishing first grade, and they had a Zoom call, and the teacher was talking to the students, and you could tell the teacher was trying to hold it together, And my wife was like, she would look away, and like you could tell she was crying, and you knew the impact of like, hey, she had just found out, like, this is it. I'm not going to get to see these kids for the rest of the year, and
Mm-hmm.
this is going to be it for them, and what's going to happen to them.
Mm-hmm.
And
And then, there's big decisions that need to happen, going forward. I mean, the fact is that education matters,
Mhm.
and a lot of the students aren't getting the level of education that we would expect them to get, for who knows how long, right? So, again, like my daughter, you give her a laptop and you say, okay, you're going to stare at the screen for 30 minutes or an hour a day. That is not substituting the level of, you know, adaptation that she was learning by being around other students, by communicating, by like what she would get from her teachers. Like her staring at a screen, man, I spend more energy trying to get her to stop staring at a screen. Now I'm, now I got her staring at a screen even more. We just have to get creative, we have to rethink, what these solutions look like. And we have to really put a focus on, when we do get back to some normalcy and we can get kids back into the classroom, let's appreciate it a little bit more.
Right.
Let's appreciate it a little bit more. And let's, and I think that teachers are going to come back more passionate than ever. Right. And that's been a big problem. In the past, I've had teachers that you're like, do you even like your job? Like, what do you, but now I think teachers that absolutely love their job, and maybe they just got, complacent over the year, they're coming back full force now. Right. We're going to have teachers fired up, ready to get back in the classroom, can't wait to get in there and do their lesson plans. We're going to have students that maybe need to reacclimate a little bit, but they're excited to see their friends and get back in there. And we need parents that, we're going to probably have a lot of parents that are very relieved to have their kids out of the house and back in the classroom. So I think once things do get back to that place, it's going to be amazing. But we need to appreciate it. We need to elevate it. And we need to make sure that we're giving all the love and attention and making sure that not only kids are safe, and schools have, a system that's really compliant, so we can not have this happen again so fast. But I think it's going to be a good thing, once it all gets back to, I hate to say normal.
Yeah, because I don't. Maybe this is the new normal. Who knows?
Maybe,
but
it's
the great sense of uncertainty.
It can't just be all online. That's for sure.
No,
it can't. Like a lot of, for college, I get it. Man, I learned more on YouTube than I did, in a lot of my undergrad. When you're old enough to just really get the information and, write papers, that's where a lot of the learning comes in. But with kids, especially with, my daughter, a lot of it's learning to work with other students.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just the learning aspect. It's learning to be a good friend, good classmate, good neighbor, good, you're acclimating them into society.
Yeah.
And we need that. You're not going to learn that on a Zoom call. You're just not.
Fortunately and unfortunately.
Right. So you, so what else? All right. Helping Hands, Giving Hope.
Mm-hmm.
So you also do the financial literacy.
Mm-hmm.
You sit on the Y board.
I'm on the Y board.
And what's the other board you sit on?
I sit on the board of Meals on Wheels.
Meals on Wheels.
The African American Credit Union Coalition.
Okay. And so how do you make time for all that?
Well, I think it's figuring stuff that I'm passionate about. I think it's, I'm passionate about helping others, and that Helping Hands, Giving Hope drives that. But also it's about meeting the needs of the community. And the Y, the Lakewood Y, it's such a blessing to be a part of the flagship Y, that we do a lot of stuff. And so, that kind of falls into that.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of spillover. So, I think,
what do you sacrifice to do all that? Everything has a sacrifice. Right?
Yeah, I think the biggest sacrifice is when my wife asked me this a couple of days ago, she says, what do you enjoy?
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of times the things that I enjoy are just those things. So,
yeah.
It's that piece. That's the.
Do you sacrifice family time?
I think, during this COVID period, no. Moving into that, yeah. I started seeing that a lot more.
How do you reconcile that?
Well, I think it's being diligent about the time that you have on the weekend, and then having a spouse that can come to you and say, hey, look, we haven't seen you a lot. Or,
right. Right, that's huge, right? So you need somebody to keep you in check.
Yeah.
Also, you start to, and I'll speak for myself, it really becomes quality over quantity sometimes.
Well, yeah, and also, Brad, when we think about it, if I think about towards the end of the year, like, you run a nonprofit, like from the end of October on, it's like there's something every weekend. And so, I think about this going back towards the end of last year. We had the YMCA I'm a part of. Our executive director left and took a greater job. And so we had to source a new one. I was on that hiring committee. And so it was doing those interviews. And then, we had, had to hire somebody. But it's also Helping Hands Giving Hope. We're doing our Thanksgiving food giveaway and prepping for our Christmas giveaway. And then, wrapping up our backpack drive, trying to get end of the year stuff out. And so, my wife said to me one day, she says, listen, I'm committed to go to these set of events with you. That's it.
Other than that, kick rocks.
Yeah, I'm not going to all those other things.
Yeah.
And so it's now trying to figure out, all right, if she's not going, maybe I shouldn't go. But also, it's not really a sacrifice if you can find things to do that you're passionate about and that you believe in.
But it's still a sacrifice, right? Like everything.
It's
everything,
a time sacrifice.
Like for you being here right now, you're sacrificing things, right? Even if you enjoy it, you're still a sacrifice. In fact, the things that you do the most of, the things that you enjoy the most, are the things that you're willing to sacrifice the most to do, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, and it's tough too, because you could really love spending family time, right? And you could sacrifice a little bit of that sometimes if you feel like what you're doing is for the greater good. And one thing, maybe I do too much sometimes, but I really believe it. Everything I do is for my family, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes I sacrifice a little bit of free time that maybe I would be at home, because supporting the community does support my family, and I want to do whatever I can to make sure where they live, where they learn, where they grow up, that I have a part in making that place as best as it can be, right? So,
yeah.
so you might sacrifice some stuff to make sure that happens, even if it's hard. But having a strong wife or partner is huge. I would not be able to do any of the stuff that I do without Mandy, because she lets me know when I'm overextending. She lets me know, like, when, hey, you haven't been around as much, and you need to, and I used to be all defensive, like get like defensive, like, well, I'm doing this and this, and like, but now I don't. I just, okay, cool. Awesome.
It was interesting. I remember once last year, towards the end of the year, we had I had an interview one night. It was a Y dinner we had on a Wednesday. I had an interviews on Thursday, and interviews on Friday morning, another event Friday evening, and I had to coach on Saturday. And I got home and I thought, man, I hadn't seen my wife in how many days? Like, what am I missing? Who haven't I seen? How haven't she and I connected? So it has given me some insight to say that I won't add anything else to the mix. I don't think.
Yeah.
There's some things on the horizon that I've been approached with, but I think I don't want to dilute the efforts that I'm able to give to some of the other things I believe in.
Right.
And the why is something I believe in.
Right. You have to have, if you spread yourself too thin, sometimes you do a disservice, because you might be taking up space where somebody who can commit a little bit more time, energy to, right?
Yeah, you don't want to do anything half-assed.
Right. And that's how I am. I won't do anything half-assed. And you know what, this might be a good time to kind of announce, because I really haven't announced at all, but I'll be running for Bellflower Unified School District Board of Education.
No way.
Yep.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I made that decision, and Mandy is 100% behind me, and we've been putting together some stuff, and was planning on announcing soon, but it's a great segue into that.
But and it partners with what you just said. You said that you want to make sure the place that your kids live and learn is the best it can be. Mm-hmm. And it's not, you'll have a voice. You'll provide Tori a voice.
Yes.
But you'll also provide other kids that have those same challenges to overcome a voice.
Exactly. and bringing a parent's perspective onto the board, and really, I mean, my biggest things are communication and transparency. You know, I'm all about communication. I mean, look what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
I think open dialogue and transparency. Sometimes I'm probably too transparent. Sometimes I believe in the power of conversation and really exposing people to how people think and how they come to the conclusions that they do. I think it's really important. But yeah, creating the community, and it's very similar to what I've done with the Chamber of Commerce. You know, the difference is you know, when I had a small business, I know like I'm going to do whatever it is to make sure that my business has a voice, that we're communicating with the greater community, and I still am going to do as much as I can in that role, and I love what I do there. But I also feel like what you were saying, like you want to maximize, you know, what you're doing out of your time and where your heart is, and my heart is 100% with my girls and their education.
Yeah, and you want to affect change.
3 and 6, man. Like this is where it starts.
So I mean, and you're at the front of this.
Yeah.
You know, I'm always believing that if you want to affect change, you affect change by action.
Yep.
Now, I believe that oftentimes that if voices are unheard, you'll shake things up.
Yeah.
But you also bring a different vantage point. You know, I got one of my best friends is a physician, and he approached me last week because the school district he is a part of in West Palm Beach, Florida, they reached out to him. I was like, hey, will you, join the board of our school?
Really?
And I was like, well, you're the only person in the school that doesn't have a net worth of $50 million.
Right.
Like the rest of those guys, they travel on private planes. You're given a completely different, not only do you look different, but you're giving a completely different vantage point of what the teachers need and what the students need.
Right.
That these guys aren't seeing. And I think that's what you'll bring to the table.
Yep. Well, I think first and foremost, a parent's perspective, right? But also a parent of a special needs student, but also bringing, I would say I've been pretty involved in the community over the past decade, and being somebody who, I consider myself a community builder. I really go, I really do the best I can to do what I can for the community. And it just makes sense for me. It makes sense. A Bellflower resident. There's going to be an open seat on the board. I want to be able to advocate, for Tori, and then Brooklyn will be in the school district just right after her. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure I advocate for my daughter, and I have a voice at the table, and I'm able to elevate and amplify other voices from the people that I know and love in the community that need to have their voices heard. And
I always think that on a lot of these nonprofit boards, the biggest thing that needs to happen, it needs to be a different voice.
Yeah.
I think, when we look at the why, the why I sit on the board of, great group of people, but a lot of those people have been on the board for a long time.
Yeah.
So you got to bring a different voice.
Yep. And again, I mean, I'm a big fan of term limits, and sometimes on a board, it is a lot of the same voices, and it can be a great voice.
Yeah.
It can be a great voice, but sometimes different times need different perspectives, and I really feel that I could do some good, and I feel like I have a lot of energy and a lot of motivation to put in a lot of work on the board. Because like you said, we're just not the type of men that would half-ass something.
Yeah, no, so, you want to give all you got to it. And your daughters are part of that school district.
Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that we learned when Tori was going through cancer treatment is you are there to advocate, and you have to advocate for those that can't advocate for themselves. Mm-hmm. Kids cannot advocate for themselves. And, some parents are very involved, some are not. And encouraging that involvement is really important. But you have to be able to advocate for what's best for the children. And the only way you know what's best for children is by listening to the parents. So encouraging parent participation, being able to support teachers and being the best teachers that they can be. And it all makes sense to me.
School's not a day camp. You don't just drop your kids off and I think we've gotten comfortable to that what it's being what it's being. So
Right.
as my kids are in the Bellflower district, I'm excited to
Yeah.
see you.
I'm very excited, and I'm excited for the campaign process too. It's just starting, and again, this is the first time I've announced, right? So it's very, very much so just starting. But what makes me excited about it is knowing that Mandy is 100% behind me, and it feels, I don't know, it feels really good. It feels really good that I feel like it's not just me running for something. I feel like my family is running for that board seat.
Here's the importance about your wife being behind it. The Bible talks about this. The Bible says in Proverbs, it says that it's better for the man to dwell in the corner than with a contentious woman. Then you read down a little bit further. It says it's better for a man to dwell on the rooftop than with a contentious woman. Then you read a little bit further. It says it's better for a man to dwell in the corner of the rooftop than with a contentious woman. Then you read a little bit further, and it says it's better for a man to dwell in the wilderness than in a house with a contentious woman. This guy, life was so bad for him, he went from the house to the roof, to the corner of the roof, to the wilderness. And so it shows you that no matter what you do, if you got a wife, you better get her on board to what you're on board with.
Yep.
And if she says she's not on board with it, as long as she's not a loon, you better figure out why.
There was no way I was still going to run if she wasn't on board with it. Like, there was just, what you just said, I 100% believe. It would not be, I do the best I can to, because I'm ride or die. Like, we're not splitting up. Like, my family unit is very, very important to me. And I put in a lot of effort to make sure I'm not creating any unnecessary wedge, and making sure that there's enough communication to where when we make a decision, we're going to make it together.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and we talked about this the last time I was on the podcast, that I'm the co-founder and co-president of Helping Hands Giving Hope.
Right.
And, as the co-founder and co-president, I can't do anything and make any decisions without the other co-founder and co-president.
Yeah. And that's what makes me so excited about it going forward. And I think the next 4 months are going to be kind of a ride, because I'm learning a lot right now. Just, even talking to people and like getting endorsements is such a new thing for me. So, but on the flip side, like, having events and really getting people behind a message and a cause, that's not a new thing. So I'm excited for that part of it. And I think it's going to be exciting. I competed for a long time, MMA, wrestled, boxed. And I kind of have that same, it's weird. I missed it. I feel like I'm ready to get in there and scrap and make sure, I'm able to, put forward my ideas and advocate for I'm fighting for my family. I'm fighting for my daughters. I'm fighting for kids. And it just feels good. It feels like I'm going back in the ring.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, you guys vote for Brad.
There you go. So I even got the website, Vote Brad 2020.
Vote Brad 2020.
.com. What commercial is that from? Pool boy. What's
GoDaddy?
Yeah, GoDaddy. .com. That one.
And since we'll be, since our kids are Bellflower students, you got our support.
Thank you. It's going to be a fun ride, and I think, working with, you and other people from the Lakewood area, I think it's going to be a good thing. Bellflower Unified School District is a big district, so I gotta, I've been so Lakewood centric for so long. Some Bellflower. I'm a Bellflower resident, but it's going to be interesting. I'm gonna have a very, very fun few months.
It should be fun.
Yeah, it will. Man, thank you so much for coming in, taking the time and sacrificing everything else you could have been doing. Anything else? Any last shout outs? Joe Wong did a shout out. Duke did a shout out.
Check us out at 4hhgh.org and Helping Hands Giving Hope on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram, SS Ministries, and keep living in victory.
Awesome. On that note, brother, thank you for coming in.
Thank you, brother.
And we'll see you guys next time.